Thank you for joining the Early Career Professionals and the Planetary and Astrophysics Decadal Survey webinar. We're really delighted to have you with us here today, and thank you for taking the time in this time of crisis, and we hope you and your families are in good health. Today, we will go through a review of the Decadal Survey process itself, which I'll provide you. Then there'll be an overview and updates from the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters, given by Laurie, Glaze. And then we'll have a panel discussion with some experts, absolutely stellar experts from the field, who I'll introduce before the panel. So I hope that that makes a lot of sense. I'll introduce Laurie after I've given you a very quick rundown of the Decadal Survey process. So this will be, what is the National Academies? What's a Decadal Survey? What are survey goals? What are the typical ground rules? What is the statement of task? Nominations process, very important for early career, white papers, and then you can ask panelists about that. Our schedule to date, done by the expert in the field at the National Academies, David Smith, who will be the study director on this study. And then we'll have that panelist with early career opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit about early career opportunities the National Academies has for you. If I could have the next slide. So the National Academies was created in 1863 during the Civil War by an act of Congress. We are advising the nation as a nonprofit entity, looking at all kinds of problems. We do have actually expert pandemic advice. Just go to the National Academies website and take a look. Next, please. I like to quote this letter from James Webb, for which James Webb Space Telescope was named, which was way back in 1961, because it's so close to the astrobiology planetary science endeavor. The primary scientific goals of this program are immense: a better understanding of the origins of the solar system and the universe, the investigation of the existence of life on other planets, and potentially an understanding of the origin of life itself. Next, please. So some things don't change. Here's a collage of all of the decadal surveys that have been undertaken by the National Academies Space Sciences Board, Space Studies Board. In astronomy and astrophysics, they were the very first ones, so there are more of them. Planetary, this is going to be the third Planetary Decadal Survey, and then you can see the others. All of these reports are available online. You can download them for free or read them online at the National Academies website. One thing you may want to do is go ahead and take a look at last decade's Planetary Science Decadal Survey as a starting point. Next, please. So what is a decadal? It is very unique in that it assesses the status of an entire scientific discipline, and then it defines and prioritizes key scientific questions for the next 10 years. And then what initiatives will address the most pressing scientific questions. So it's really important to note that decadal surveys are conducted by the National Academies completely independently of the sponsoring agencies or organizations. They hire us in order to have that independence. Once we have agreed to a statement of task for a decadal survey, then the Academies does the rest of the work with the help of the scientific community and does not go back for advice from the agencies for membership or chair or anything of the sort. Next, please. Decadal surveys are actually required in the NASA Authorization Act, that they actually do a decadal for every discipline of space science. So sponsoring agencies and Congress use decadal surveys as the formal statement of priority by the scientific community, and they give incredible weight to the priorities that are identified in the survey. Next, please. So what are the goals of a survey? You want to outline the program for the coming decade. You want community, we all want community participation as much as we possibly can, and Most recently, there's been a strong emphasis at looking at the risk of major missions whenever possible, and we now call this process TRACE, Technical Risk and Cost Assessment. I do want to point out that two things. One, Aerospace Corporation is the entity that has done this most often in the past, and two, we are really looking at the risk posture and a cost envelope for these major missions at this stage. You can't have a point solution. And so the TRACE process is incredibly important when prioritization conversations go on in a decadal. Next, please. What are the typical ground rules? Only missions that have a formal budget line are assumed a priority to be a part of the decadal plan, and therefore they don't need to be prioritized. Surveys do not usually prioritize small missions like discovery class missions, and they don't prioritize research and analysis activities. Missions that might have been extensively studied, but they are not in phase A, are prioritized. They tend to be on the table. Laurie, when she speaks, will be giving you a little more about the specifics of the statement of task for this decadal. Next, please. So what is this statement of task? You can find it on our website, and it's the guiding document of a survey. It outlines exactly what the sponsors, in this case, NASA and NSF, and the National Academies are committed to do, no more and no less. It is a contractual agreement. The website has additional information that's called scope, considerations, and approach, and that information is in order to help the academies perform the survey and for the community to understand what the background and ideas are for this particular survey. Next, please. So we have a nominations process, and for early careers, I really want to encourage you. You can self-nominate, don't be shy. You can nominate people you think would be great on the survey. We're looking for individuals who have characteristics like scientific and technical expertise and objectivity, broad and open-minded thinkers, and not specifically active proponents of a particular mission. Folks who have experience in project management or organizational or enterprise management, that's quite advantageous. And of course, they have to be willing to participate in what we hope will be in-person survey committee activities. Next, please. So white paper specifications, I'm not going to dwell on this, but we will, I did want to alert you. You can go to this website. The white paper specifications are defined, and you can submit your white paper. It's up and running today. Your white paper has to be no more than 7-page single-spaced, and that includes all your figures and tables. References, however, can include links to other places. Then on top of that, you can have a cover page beyond the 7-page limit and give us the author's name and phone number, institution, and your co-authors' names and institutions. This is 12-point font and 1 inch. Please put your document in Word, in .doc or an Adobe PDF format. And if you go over 50 megabytes in size, it will be rejected and it will not be reviewed. So remember that every white paper, you may decide to write a white paper on your own or join a group who are writing white papers, and that would be wonderful. Every one will be read, often by more than one panel on the decadal. Next, please. So what's the schedule we have now? David Smith has put together with NASA headquarters and input, we work together on this, a schedule for this decadal. And as you can see all the milestones that have been met, this is the Early Career LPSC event, and I want to really sincerely thank LPSC for hosting this webinar. instead of the in-person meeting that had to be canceled due to the pandemic. So that is today. The survey officially began March 20th, so we are now underway. This month, white paper submissions will begin. We're working on a chair. Again, that's done independently by the National Academies. And we have a process whereby National Academies members and others input potential chair names. We gather up from all sources and look at each person carefully. Panel members are done the same way. We are very, very committed at the Academies to get a diverse group across multiple dimensions of members. So gender, institutional, geographic distribution are all looked at as we look for experts in the United States to have on these panels. And I do want to mention that the National Academies has always strived and in fact achieved putting an early career person, at least one, on all of our decadal panels, including the last Planetary Decadal, and we intend to continue to do that. There is a white paper deadline on the 4th of July, no earlier. That no earlier than is that we recognize everyone is perhaps achieving at more or less right now a 70% rate, given we're all teleworking and the impacts that the entire pandemic have made for each and every one of you, for your families and your extended community. So it will be no earlier than July 4th. We'll complete the draft in autumn of the survey, and there is an extensive Academies review process. And then in the spring of 2022, the Decadal is released. And I just want to mention how very critically important it is to members of the Hill. The staff is all briefed on it after the sponsoring agencies, NASA and NSF, are briefed. And they have it on their bookshelves, they refer to it, it stays there a decade. It is their go-to document when they are looking at the NASA budget. So it's incredibly important. And no good deed goes unpunished. Those members of the steering committee on the Decadal and the chair has a dissemination job for quite some time after the Decadal is released. One further comment is that the Decadal cannot be released until the president of the National Academies has signed off on it, following this extensive peer review process that goes on. So that is one of the things that takes some time in this timeline. Next, please. So this is my last slide where I wanted to mention to you, or second to last, early career opportunities that we have at the National Academies. First off, white papers. Any person can author a white paper, either individually or with a group, on any subject of your choosing that's relevant to the Decadal Survey. So look at the statement of task. Second, we do have a full-time job advertised right now for the Space Studies Board, of which I'm the director. Please take a look, looking for people with PhDs, postdocs. This is the first step in. If you're interested in having a policy career, this would be a wonderful opportunity. Please do look at it and please apply. We will be looking for note takers once we have meeting dates. So we'll be reaching back out to you for that. We have a couple fellowships and internships as well. This Berkner internship is for undergraduates and grad students. Take a look at that, please apply. And then there's a Mirzayan fellowship for grad students and those less than 5 years out from their PhD. That's on the website, and I'm happy that our current Mirzayan fellow, Samantha Rollins, is on this call and has supported this event along with Mia Brown and of course David Smith with me today. So many thanks to them. And my last slide. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this one. I did want to make a comment that we live in just this amazing time and how lucky we are in planetary sciences, in that the planetary sciences budget has doubled since 2014. Congress has been incredibly generous, and compelling arguments have been made in order to have this kind of uptick in the Science Mission Directorate budget. So congratulations to all of you and the early career folks. Welcome to this very compelling scientific endeavor. So planetary exploration is very healthy, and we expect it to continue to be so. Next, please. So the outcomes that decadals have allowed us to have are just a collage here of all of the Science Mission Directorate missions that are enabled by queuing up and having the community stand behind a decadal and then advocate for the missions, the prioritized missions in that decadal, have allowed discoveries across the solar system and across the universe in science for NASA and for NSF. Next, please. So now we have my last slide, which is that there are more webinars to come. We hope to keep a cadence, especially early in the process, of webinars for early career folks. We're hoping that the next one would be a white paper 101 class, if you will, to help you write your white paper for the decadal. And then here on this last slide, I have other websites that you might find interesting, including a generic description of the decadal surveys and the upcoming ones for the Space Studies Board and the Science Mission Directorate. What other things the Space Studies Board does is in the middle. Of course, information on the planetary and also the astrophysics decadal survey can be found on our websites. And then I gave you the Gizmo link for white paper submissions because we're so eager to have your white papers. So with that, I thank you very much. I'm looking forward to any questions you might have at the end with our panelists. And I am delighted to be able to introduce Laurie next.
Great. Thank you, Colleen. And I'm hearing that there are upwards of around 300 or more people online right now, which is really exciting. We're glad to have you all here and listening and participating in this early career decadal survey
Laurie,
event.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would love to give a short introduction of the wonderful things you have done in your career just for a moment.
Okay.
So Laurie is the Division Director of NASA's Planetary Science Division. Her work focuses on data analysis and theoretical modeling of surface processes on all the terrestrial solar system bodies, particularly the Earth, Venus, Mars, Moon, and Io. Laurie also served as the Chief of the Planetary Geology, Geophysics, and Geochemistry Lab at Goddard, and as the Deputy Director at Goddard of the Solar System Exploration Division. She was a member of the Inner Planets panel during the most recent Planetary Science Decadal Survey, and she also had a role on the executive committee of NASA's VEXAG, that's the Venus Exploration Analysis Group. So I just wanted to give you a little contextualization of who you are hearing from if you don't know Laurie Glaze, and over to you, Laurie.
Great. Thanks again, Colleen. Appreciate it. So what I thought I would do here today is talk a little bit about the Planetary Science Division as a whole. We're really fortunate that Planetary Science Division encompasses a really broad range of activities, potentially more than you may be aware of. And so I just want to talk a little bit about all of those different things that we do, and then talk a little bit more in detail about what we're hoping to get from the decadal survey in planetary science and astrobiology, as we're calling this particular decadal survey. So just talking a little bit about what actually makes up the Planetary Science Division. I've been in this role as division director now for almost 2 years, and I have to say that when I came in, I just was really amazed at how much the Planetary Science Division really does. We've got an incredible portfolio that spans a really broad range of activities. One of the most important parts of our program is, of course, the research and analysis programs, the RNA work that we do. The RNA programs are really the backbone of everything that we do in planetary science. And this is particularly important for planetary as opposed to the other science divisions at NASA because in all fairness, almost all of the planetary science research that's funded in the United States comes out of NASA's Planetary Science Division. And so it's an incredibly important program to support the research, the analysis of data from prior missions, and the development of new hypotheses that drive the next missions that will be conducted. It's an incredibly important part of our work. One of the key areas within RNA, within our research program, is astrobiology. And this is, of course, a program that is housed in planetary science, but has implications much broader across all of the NASA science divisions. There's a lot of cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary work in astrobiology that crosses over the artificial funding boundaries between the different science divisions within NASA. And so this program is incredibly important. It actually supports one of the core objectives within NASA science, which is understanding where life can form in the search for life elsewhere. In addition to RNA, one of our other major programs is the Planetary Defense Program. This is something that is work that's been done within planetary for quite a while, but only the last couple years do we have a specific call out in our budget now for the Planetary Defense Program, which includes a Planetary Defense Coordination Office. This office includes ground-based and space-based observations of near-Earth objects to help identify and characterize those objects. Also includes research into mitigation techniques should there be a near-Earth object that threatens Earth. And it currently also includes some flight programs. There's a mission in that line called the Double Asteroid Redirection Test. It's a flight mission that'll launch in 2021 to test some of those asteroid impact mitigation techniques. Mars Exploration Program is a big part of planetary science. We have, as you know, I'm sure, a number of spacecraft at Mars that make up the Mars Exploration Program, but it also includes research in that line as well as investments in future technologies. We have our competed mission lines, Discovery, which is our smaller end of our competed lines. These are with cost caps around $500 million. Of course, the actual cost for those missions is much more than that. The cost cap includes the development costs, and it excludes launch vehicles in Phase E. But again, those are smaller end Discovery class missions. We also have a relatively new line called Simplex, which are small spacecraft, small sats at the $55 million cost cap range. And we actually include Simplex is in a funding sense inside of our Discovery line. We have New Frontiers, which are kind of medium class missions. These are about twice the size of Discovery, but they're still competed with a principal investigator that leads these investigations. The three New Frontiers examples that have already flown include New Horizons, Juno, and OSIRIS-REx, and the next one in that line will be Dragonfly. We have a program called Outer Planets and Ocean Worlds, and the Outer Planets and Ocean Worlds program includes a lot of research areas, helping to develop technologies, both for how to operate in an ocean world environment, but also how to, looking into instrumentation for life detection or understanding biosignatures. And right now, our key mission in that line is Europa Clipper. So this chart here just basically shows our flight missions at the moment within Planetary Science Division. And we always seem to talk a lot about and have some emphasis on these flight missions because these are what takes up the bulk of the funding in our program lines. But as I said, I talked about some of the other things that kind of sit around the edges of the flight programs that really are the foundation for the different flight missions. But this is a pretty robust program with 25 missions on this chart, with 13 currently in operations and 12 in development, with planned launches between now and 2026. And this type of robust portfolio was enabled by that last decadal survey, which provided the priorities and the balance that allowed us to put forward this incredible portfolio that we have today. So talk a little bit about how important it is to have your involvement in the decadal survey. Our decadal survey is as good as the participation, certainly as good as having the best people to serve on the panels, but also the input and contributions from the community are absolutely critical in order to have the best product at the other end. As you've seen, the survey recommendations are incredibly important. They can influence our future initiatives. The sponsoring agencies, both NASA and NSF, that are participating in this decadal survey, as well as Congress, give the highest priority to the missions that are identified in the survey. So it's incredibly important. Your input and your say in what's important in those priorities can influence where the agency goes in the next decade. Some of the highest recommendations from the last decadal survey included the recommendations for Mars sample return. This actually started with Mars 2020, which is going to be launching this July, as well as a Mars sample return, which is now starting to get underway. A major recommendation from the last decadal survey. There was also a recommendation for a Jupiter Europa orbiter, which is now evolved into what's now Europa Clipper, which we hope to launch in the next several years. And the important part of your contributions, again, to the survey is that the missions that get proposed are prioritized, are going to be led by you and your generation. You are the leaders of tomorrow, and so these missions that are being recommended will be yours to implement in the coming decade. So Colleen mentioned that there's a statement of task that is the guiding document for the decadal survey. She gave a little bit of a sense that it outlines what NASA and NSF are asking the academies to do. And as she said, it's very, very important that we carefully word what goes into that statement of task, because the committees are required to do no more and no less than what's actually in that document. And Colleen gave the website. I've given it again here. I encourage you to go look at it, not just the statement of task, but also those considerations and approaches that are also provided in that document. So in looking at the statement of task, we have a variety of things that, of course, are very similar to what was in the last statement of task. One of the most important parts of the decadal survey is to do an inventory of the top level science questions and the research activities that are going on within the Planetary Science Division. We also ask for the survey to provide us with their recommendations on the optimum balance between all the various target bodies within the solar system, the balance between the large flagship class, the medium and the small missions, the balance between ground and space-based activities, and the balance between all of those activities with our research programs. So we look to the survey to give us that insight and guidance into what those priorities are and the balance. We also ask them to help provide priorities. So that helps us to better direct the funding that we do have into the highest priorities as identified by the survey. So we ask them specifically to look at the large and the medium class spaceflight missions and put those in a priority order so that we know where to invest first. We've also asked them to rank the ground-based facilities, in particular for NSF, and then also to provide us with input on priorities for the supporting research. In addition to those things that are fairly similar to last time, we're asking to put a higher priority and a larger emphasis on astrobiology and planetary defense. I've already mentioned that both of these parts of our portfolio are large parts, but they're also extremely important parts of the planetary science portfolio. And so we feel that it's important that they be included explicitly as part of this balancing and prioritizing activity for the whole Planetary Science Division. We've also are recognizing that as we look forward to the next coming years, the coming decade, that human exploration activities may play a much larger role in exploration beyond Earth orbit. And so we'd like to have the Decadal Survey to look at and consider what types of science activities are enabled by human exploration, and how we can work together with human exploration so that the science enables the exploration and exploration enables science. We also asked them to look at collaborative opportunities with NASA and our international partners. Finally, we also have asked that the Decadal Survey should provide a clear exposition of the state of the profession. We feel this is really important, that we take an opportunity to really understand the diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility, creation of safe workspaces, recommended policies and practices to improve the state of the profession. This is very important to us. The health and vitality of our community is incredibly important. The science we do is as good as our community. So we're looking to the survey to, where possible, to provide these specific and actionable practical recommendations to both NASA and NSF, as well as the community, to help us address any places in these areas of the state of the profession where perhaps we could do better going forward. Thinking about what the panel structure might look like, in the last Decadal Survey, the last planetary survey, there were about 70 members of the community that served on the panels and committee. Going forward, in the statement of tasks that we've provided, we've asked that one representative from each of the individual subject panels will serve on the steering committee, and that the composition of the steering group and the panels will take full advantage of the diversity of the planetary science, astrobiology, and planetary defense communities. And that diversity should consider factors such as gender, race, ethnicity, career stage, types and sizes of institutions, and geographic distribution. This is incredibly important to us, that we have diversity across all of these, and in particular, I'll call your attention to the importance of participation from early career community members. We feel that it's important that the panel actually reflect the demographics of our community, and so we have placed an emphasis on this in our guidelines to the academies. Of course, the National Academies, their procedures for reducing and balancing biases and for ensuring that the steering group and panels have the needed expertise will be followed. Colleen spoke about the important qualities that the panel members should have, and they will also be looking very carefully to make sure that we minimize or limit people bringing in their biases as they come to serve on the panel, so we get the most independent view possible. Colleen gave some specific ways that you can get directly involved, and I just want to reiterate those at this point. I think it's important that you sign up for the mailing list to get updates on other input and other study activities. I really want to encourage you again to self-nominate for steering committees and panels. It's absolutely an okay thing for you to nominate yourself, and we encourage you to do that. Or in nominating your colleagues and other folks that you work with that you know in the community. Very much want to encourage you to contribute to the white papers. As Colleen said, the submissions will begin shortly. There's actually on the LPI website that's quoted here is an opportunity for you to get with and coordinate with other people in the community, other like-minded individuals that may be interested in working together on white papers. And so this website is a place where you can find other people that perhaps are already working on a paper you're interested in, or you can post an idea and try and get additional interest. Again, the survey is as good as the input and the people that contribute. So please look to submit your ideas through a white paper. I encourage you to apply for some of those survey support roles that Colleen spoke about. And I also wanted to encourage you to attend the virtual Planetary Missions Concept Studies Workshop. This one is, it was originally scheduled to happen at LPSC. We're working on a new date for that. But this is the collection of mission concept studies that NASA is funding in preparation for the Decadal Survey. And this particular workshop is an opportunity for each one of those 11 studies to present to the community where they are in those concept developments, to get feedback from the community and really work together to make those concept study reports as best as they can be as they feed into the Decadal Survey. So I encourage you to pay attention for when that workshop is rescheduled and encourage you to participate. And with that, I believe I am done with this, and I'm going to hand it back over to Colleen.
Thank you, Laurie. That was very informative and interesting. I do have a couple questions that at least one type of white paper question for which there are three specific questions. And I think between Laurie and my presentation, I believe we've answered them, but I want to specifically give you answers to your questions on white papers. One is, are self-nominations given less weight? And I want to absolutely assure you that they are all given the same weight. We look at the National Academies, at each person, at the expertise. We're devoted to that cross section of all kinds of different diversity metrics on our steering committee and on the panels as a whole. So please don't feel shy. We don't look at, oh goodness, you nominated yourself or not. So nominate those you think have the kinds of characteristics I mentioned. And please, if you're interested, self-nominate and don't be shy. I was also asked if lead authors who are well-known would be treated different, their white papers would be treated differently than those not known. I must say I have continued to be impressed with just the fairness of each and every review of white papers by members of the Decadal Committee when it's put together. They're the type of people who read your ideas and judge the white paper based on idea, not on authorship, and not on how many authors there are on it. So if you think you have good ideas and you want to write the white paper yourself, feel free. We don't discriminate in these ways at all. Let's see, I might have a question here for Laurie. Just give me 1 second. So we've had a couple questions on the caveats for nominations. And I don't know whether we can bring up my backup slide or not, Laurie. That might be.
I'll try.
Oh, good.
Give me just a moment.
You're a master.
I'm just going to go backwards here. This one?
There you go. Nominations caveats. So in order to answer this question, and we will post this, we have two ways of looking at conflicts at the academies. One is a financial conflict and the other is bias, as Laurie mentioned. And you can have a financial conflict, which means there's nothing we can do to have your participation on the Decadal, and so that would be exclusionary. However, I've put down here some of the things you might be most interested in for white papers and mission studies. All authors of science-focused white papers are eligible for membership consideration. First authors of the mission-focused white papers, the ones that Laurie has funded, cannot serve on steering groups or panels that are considering those specific missions. An easy way to look at this is you don't get to grade your own homework. So we don't allow those who have spearheaded a particular mission concept to be on a panel that might judge that concept or that mission proposal against the other ones. Seems pretty straightforward. PIs of the NASA-funded pre-decadal mission concepts can't, so this is, I'm sorry, so same thing, Laurie's funded pre-mission concepts, the same concept applies. So for white papers that are mission focused and you're a primary author, you're not going to be asked to judge that white paper or be on a panel that's doing so. For pre-decadal mission concepts Laurie has funded, you won't be asked if you're primary PI or author to be on a panel judging that concept. So we can find out with follow-up questions if that helps. Laurie, if you'd like to add anything there, these are Academy roles. We look at each individual when we can ameliorate bias. For instance, might be institutional bias, where you have someone from an institution that has a sort of another institution that might be competing with them. Then we try to look into getting a person from each in order to mute any biases. So with that, Laurie, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Sure. The only thing I would add for folks in the community is that we, myself and Michael New at NASA headquarters, actually worked very closely with Colleen to come up with these guidelines so that we could have something that was explicit and clear as far as what people can, or what the expectations are for what you can or can't do in serving on the committee. Certainly, you know, it's our hope that we have the best and the brightest individuals from our community serving on the Decadal Survey. And so we want to be as inclusive as we possibly can, but there are some restrictions based on some of the potential perceived biases that could be there, as Colleen has mentioned. So these were the guidelines that we worked together to make sure that we all support as far as who's eligible to serve on which parts of the committee. So thank you, Colleen, for going through those.
Yes, and as Laurie said, I think we really worked closely with Michael New and Laurie to make sure that these were stated in ways that were understandable and you can read them. I have one or two other ones maybe we'll take now, including when will the panel members and steering committee members be chosen? We're undergoing that right now. It has slowed down a bit, I must admit, given that we are teleworking. It isn't staff who, by the way, David Smith and Mia are just incredibly dedicated, and I had to, you know, lock the Academy's door so they wouldn't come into work. The point is that members are, a lot of the members will be university based, and many of these people are professors and or if they're have children, they're struggling right now and haven't had a lot of time for us to have conversations about a chair or co-chairs, it's not decided, and panel membership. So as I said on the other chart, we've just been given the green light to begin work, and we will be doing that as quickly as we possibly can. Let's see. Is there a role for senior graduate students to play in this process? So I think both Laurie and I have mentioned roles on that one slide there that senior graduate students can play. I would point out the note taker role for David Smith. I think it's just fascinating to be listening in on these panels. And oh, by the way, you know, every panel will have open sessions that every single one of you can call into remotely. And even if we're back to being in person, you'll still be able to call in or attend in person. Laurie, if you'd like to add anything on that, feel free.
I think you've covered it. Thanks.
Thanks. So I think with that, we will actually take advantage of Laurie and our other esteemed panel members, because I think you will learn an enormous amount from them. The panel is made up of personal experience. And so I'm just going to give you a brief bio on each of these people. And trust me, it's quite short, given, had to be truncated given everything they've done. Bethany Ellman is a professor of planetary science at Caltech and a research scientist at JPL. Her primary research interests include planetary surface processes and habitability, infrared spectroscopy, and instrumentation and chemical weathering and hydrothermy alteration throughout the solar system. She's on the science teams of the MRO, XRISM instrument, the Mars rover Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance, and was a collaborator on the Dawn mission during its Ceres phase. She is also PI of the Lunar Trailblazer mission, and she's a member of the Academies Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science, known as CAPS. Next up, we have Bill McKinnon, who is a professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Washington University in St. Louis. His research interests include the structure, origin, evolution, geology, and bombardment history of outer planet satellites and dwarf planets, and impact mechanisms on rocky and icy bodies. He's a distinguished visiting scientist at JPL and an editor of the Earth and Planetary Science Letters. He's on the science team of NASA's New Horizons mission and the Europa Clipper, and on ESA's JUICE mission. He's co-chair of the National Academies Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Sciences. So welcome, Bill. Our third member is Louisa Proctor, and she is director of the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Houston, Texas, and a co-I on the Europa Clipper mission. Her scientific research focuses on the geomorphology and structural tectonics of icy satellites and other solar system bodies. She is particularly interested in surface history and evolution as evidenced by volcanism and tectonism. Louisa was on the Galileo and NEAR missions, and deputy project scientist and co-I on the Messenger mission, and was a deputy project scientist on the Europa Clipper mission. Louise has participated in numerous National Academies advisory panels, including the Committee for Planetary Exploration, known as COMPLEX, the Space Studies Board, and the Planetary Decadal Survey, as well as NASA's Planetary Sciences Subcommittee. She recently co-chaired the Planetary Decadal Survey midterm review. And along with Laurie Glaze, whom I introduced earlier, they are going to each give you a brief statement, and so be prepared with some questions for them that I'm sure they'd be happy to take. I think we'll go in order of our agenda, and so Bethany, you're first up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colleen. So it's a pleasure to be on here and talking to you. I was introduced as a seasoned veteran. I'm not sure that's exactly true. I'm technically still early career, if that's 10 years since PhD till June, but I can tell you a little bit about my experiences with the Academies and Academies Review, as well as decadal survey processes, and just offer some general comments. So that's what I'll do for just about 5 minutes or so. Here, I actually got involved in the decadal survey process when I was super early career. I got involved in the last, not this past decadal survey most recently, but the one in 2003, because I was that undergraduate intern at the Space Studies Board for the summer that the panel was like rolling in the final comments from external reviewers, while simultaneously the staff at the Space Studies Board were preparing a sort of 20-page colorful synopsis brief of it to brief out to Congress and staffers and OMB. And so I got to work on assembling that document, trying to go from the 200-page thick report to the 20-page, parse it out to policymakers and explain why our science is important to policy, to the general public, why it is in fact a national priority that we do some of the things in the survey. So at a super early career stage, that was a good introduction to what Colleen mentioned in terms of the end product, which is having a cohesive vision as a community that we can present then outwardly. And so I was a graduate student in my very last 2 years of graduate school during the last decadal survey. So I echo, I understand the questions that are being asked. Well, how can I participate? I'm about to become a formal part of this community. And so I resonate a lot with that question. And I can say that at the time, it was by means of talking about my published work and having hallway conversations, with some of my mentors in the field who were on the decadal panel. I think there are some more opportunities this time around that I encourage folks to take advantage of. Since then, as Colleen mentioned, I serve on the National Academies Committee for Astrobiology and Planetary Sciences. I have participated in the recent process of reviewing the astrobiology strategy by submitting white papers to that, and then talking on multiple occasions with that committee that followed up with some of the content in our white paper. I've been an external reviewer for other reports, so that's also a way that people can contribute as potentially being external reviewers. And yeah, I hope to play an even larger role this time as I move into like more mid-career part of my trajectory. So to finish up, I guess I'll offer two potential, I don't know, pieces of thoughts from the perspective of thinking about it as an early career person. I think the first thing is, one thing I kind of have had to do is sort of adjust the perspective of the time horizon that I'm thinking about. The Decadal Survey is not really about what we want NASA to do like right now, like in this moment. It's what we want NASA to be doing and what we want NASA planetary science to be and astrobiology to be, 10, even 15, even 20 years down the road. So, expand the time horizon of your thought to envision when you are mid-career, what are the types of missions that you want to be carrying out, and what is the groundwork that needs to be talked about now in the Decadal Survey to do that? And it's kind of a different mode of thinking, this long-term sort of sense of the time horizon, but that's the kind of time horizon. And then the second thing, in that regardless of whether anyone on this call ends up with a role on one of the panels, one of the things you can be is a sort of a thought leader and an instigator of the important conversations that need to happen about what are the best ideas, what are the scientific priorities, what are the priority measurements, what are the priority, what's important for how to implement RNA, how do we make these things happen? So much, the ideas become better the more that they're talked about, the more that they're discussed, the more that you try them on someone who doesn't study your planetary body of choice and see whether it resonates. And so this process of conversation and dialogue is really important in advance of the Decadal Survey to get the best ideas out there and start people moving towards a consensus. And anyone can do that regardless of whether there's a formal role.
Great, wonderful. Thanks. I think we'll move on to Laurie then. And then remember post your questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. So I've already kind of talked on one side of my current role of how I'm involved with the Decadal Survey this time, but I thought I would talk for just a moment as part of the panel about my participation in the last Decadal Survey. And so as Colleen mentioned in the introduction, I was a member of the Inner Planets panel of the last Decadal Survey. And just to give you a little bit about my experience in serving in that role, I was part of the nomination process. I actually, I did do a self-nomination, but I believe my boss also actually nominated me as well, which was nice to have someone else put that in, but it wasn't required. And I was very excited to have the opportunity to serve on that panel. It was really interesting. I actually, prior to the panel, was involved with writing several science white papers. At that time, I was very actively engaged with the Venus Exploration Analysis Group. And I find that the analysis groups are a great way to get the whole community, but in particular early career individuals, tied into what are the big science questions that the communities are interested in. And so through that process, I was able to get engaged with the Venus community and help contribute to several white papers that went in to the Decadal Survey, and then was selected to be a panel member for the Inner Planets panel. And as part of that panel, Colleen said at the beginning that every single white paper is read by at least one, maybe more, well, certainly more than one person. At least they're considered by at least one panel. And I can promise you that everyone on our panel read every single paper that was contributed to the Inner Planets panel. We read every one of those in detail, and then we read all of the other white papers that were contributed to the survey as well, even though they weren't necessarily discussed in our panel. So I can absolutely promise you that they are all read and all given an incredible amount of consideration and discussion. There was a lot of time devoted to discussion of the ideas and concepts that came through in each of those white papers. And then as a panel member, we actually looked at some of the mission concept ideas that came in. And those were, in the last go round, we had to do the concept studies as part of the Decadal Survey. And so I was lucky enough to get to serve as a science champion, which was a person from the Decadal Survey itself that then served as kind of the science liaison with the engineering centers. In this case, it was Goddard. And I was able to serve as a science champion for 3 concepts that were studied through that process. And they did mission concept studies as part of the Decadal Survey. And that was a really exciting role as well, to get to watch that happen. This time we're trying to do some of those concept studies in advance, but I do expect there will be additional concept studies conducted as part of the survey. So that was another really interesting part of the process, is to watch how those concept studies were developed and then to debate those within the panel, and then send recommendations up to the steering committee for them to consider which ones might be part of the final Decadal Survey. So that's a really important part of the process as well. And it all starts with those white papers that come in with the different ideas that come in. And so I really liked what Bethany said about being able to think broadly and think about not just where we are now, but where we are going into the future. But I'd also like to encourage you, just putting back on my division director hat, it's really important where I sit to know where to take the funding that I get and put it in the best place that we have available. And the survey really provides those, not just the great ideas, but the prioritization and that balance. Getting the guidance from the Decadal Survey on how to balance those different parts of the program. And as a participant in the survey or through your white papers, you have the opportunity to provide input on what that balance should be and what those priorities should be. So with that, I'll let you move on to the next one.
Great, that was terrific. Thank you so much. And next up is Bill McKinnon. Over to you, Bill.
That is the Complex Committee, the Committee on Planetary and Lunar Exploration, on a couple of stints as an early career scientist, or maybe mid-career as one at the next stage. And I found it to be an absolutely fascinating experience to work with a broad range of colleagues who I previously did not know well. It's very different from doing research as a PhD student or even as a postdoc. It's very different than from going to a scientific conference. It's an incredibly enriching experience, and also you really get to think broadly and work together towards a common goal of trying to really put together advice that the government agencies, in this case NASA or the NSF, can actually use. So I strongly encourage anybody who's truly interested in that kind of thing to seriously consider, and just as everybody's been saying, to nominate yourself if you like. Of course, it does involve work, but it's very, very rewarding. And it's not just to, again, push one's own personal projects or ideas, but also to basically help the entire field move forward. Okay, now would like though to show a slide. Those of you who know me realize that I'm an outer planets kind of person. I came of scientific age, if you like, during the Voyager era. In fact, was for just a brief moment, in a way, a postdoc with the Voyager imaging team. And the exploration of the outer solar system, the expansion of our horizon to encompass much more broadly what planetary geology and planetary science means, was absolutely compelling. And one of the things that a lot of us back in the day, certainly as when Voyager 2 reached Neptune and went beyond, was that we wanted to continue exploring. And that meant a mission to Pluto. And what you see in this graphic is a series of a real mission, a couple of real missions, that is Voyager 1 and the New Horizons at the right side, and then a bunch of other possible Pluto missions that were proposed and, shall we say, unproposed or killed outright along the way. The compelling scientific arguments, however compelling they might have been, were not enough to actually get a mission into the Kuiper Belt flown. The one on the right, though, New Horizons actually did ultimately get a new start in 2001, but it was about to be, shall we say, strangled in its crib. And basically the onus was put on that project to become highly ranked in what would become the first Planetary Decadal Survey. And in fact, it wasn't just to be highly ranked, it had to be the #1 priority. And just as previous speakers have mentioned about, possible conflicts of interest, since that mission had been technically started and then maybe stopped, or halted, shall we say, it was no one on that mission, including myself, was allowed to participate directly in that decadal survey. But that decadal survey ultimately did rank the New Horizons mission as its #1 large mission. #1 sort of priority. And it also proposed starting, in fact, an entire line of PI-led medium-class missions, which of course we now have the fabulously successful Juno and we get the samples back, OSIRIS-REx, and then Dragonfly and all the rest of it. And what I'm trying to say is that the Decadal Survey, if we didn't have that Decadal Survey, the first one that led by the late Mike Belton, New Horizons would never have flown, and we never would have learned anything fabulous that we have about Pluto and Arrokoth and who knows other parts of the Kuiper Belt. So it's absolutely crucial to advance our field. Next slide. Bethany mentioned that you get to really think big. And that's one of the wonderful things about planetary science. We look at deep time, we look at the beginning of the solar system, we look at things before the beginning of the solar system. We look at ever larger volumes of space, and now, of course, reaching into the realm of exoplanets. And this sort of really broad view connects even to cultural things where we think about not just deep time, but also deep time going forward, like the clock of the long now, or archiving the world's plant seeds in Svalbard. So planetary science is about the long now. Planetary science is about the big here. And there's really almost no limit to what we can think about, but it's important to think not only broadly, but also think concretely and wisely. So whatever your interest in missions, whatever your interest in scientific topics, it doesn't have to be missions. This is an incredible opportunity to not only put these ideas forward and see how your colleagues react, but also to set priorities. Because I think if we look around to the world today, planetary science budget has grown greatly as of recent years. And in fact, I think a lot has to do with the keen and very precise recommendations of the previous two planetary decadal surveys. But the world going forward, after we pull through the pandemic, there will be economic fallout, and prioritization, wise prioritization, will become incredibly important. And my last thought is my last slide. One of the people I worked with closely in a different kind of committee, not an Academy committee, but a NASA committee, was called the Planetary Science Subcommittee. That's evolved into what's called the Planetary Science, it's called the PAC. So even if you don't take part in Academy committees, I also encourage all early career and mid-career scientists to, when they are called to serve on NASA committees, to also do so. One of the things, Ron and I worked closely up to his untimely death a few years ago, and one of Ron's passions was trying to convince NASA to start a mission to Europa. Of course, we have the Clipper now. And what impressed me so much about Ron's passion was that he knew that he was unlikely to see this mission actually arrive at Europa, but he still, bent bent his strength to the wheel to turn it forward. So I'm just encourage everybody. It doesn't have to be, serving on the Decadal doesn't have to be about your pet idea. It's about ideas that are great and that will go forward. Beth, you talked about 10 or 20. I would say 50 years, because what's in this Decadal will influence the path of science and therefore the next Decadal and the Decadal after that. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was terrific. Louisa Proctor, you are our last speaker, and then we'll take some more questions. Thank you. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Colleen. And Bill, I'm really glad you showed the image of Ron. He was also very inspirational to me, and watching him run panels was quite incredible. He was very, very good at bringing a large number of people with disparate opinions to consensus, which is quite a skill. So we were asked to give a little bit about our history. Obviously, Colleen mentioned my bio earlier, but I went back to my CV and I realized that my first National Academies panel was actually within 5 years of getting my PhD. And that panel was complex, which Bill described very well. And I liked also what Bill said about it being enriching. That was the first time that I had done anything where I felt that I was really making a difference to the community, sort of outside of just, moving the science along. So that was a great experience for me also. And I was sort of trying to piece together my history of getting to the Decadal. So I was on the satellites panel of the 2013 Decadal Survey, and I had done, in addition to complex, a couple of other National Academies panels prior to that. And I obviously, I don't know why I was asked to be on that committee, but I think some of it was that I was quite plugged into the community in other ways other than science. And I get asked often, what can I do to get on the next Decadal? And I know those decisions are being made now, and it's probably a little bit late for some of you to start some of these activities, but just for future reference, I had been involved in things like the DPS Federal Relations Subcommittee. I had been involved in GSA. I was the Secretary Treasurer, and then sort of moving up through the ranks there. I'd been an editor of EOS for a couple of years. I'd been an editor at Icarus. So I had been involved in a number of activities outside of just my scientific interests. And I was also involved in a lot of mission studies. And that experience proved to be very useful when I was on the Decadal panel, because you do, as has been discussed by the previous speakers, you do have to think very broadly. And so some of that experience was extremely useful for me. And then the Decadal Survey experience itself was useful for my most recent role, which was co-chairing the 2018 Decadal Midterm Review, which I co-chaired with Joe Rothenberg. And that was, again, a very interesting, sometimes tough experience, but, I think we came out of that with a very good report. I did want to sort of build on a few of the remarks about what does it actually mean to be on a panel. Just some of the nuts and bolts, it is quite a time commitment, especially on the Decadal. I think we worked for about 18 months on the last Decadal just on our panel, and I know the steering committee put in a huge number of greater hours. So be prepared to clear your calendar. This is it's, I think, a huge honor to be asked. And you are representing, not just your own interests, but the interests of those in your community. And that can be tough in itself. You do need to be prepared to do a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of editing, a lot of revisions. I think we had 12 people on our panel for the last satellites panel. So, and we were the satellites panel, but there are a lot of IC satellites and IO. There are other satellites out there, and it was quite a large task. And of those 12 people, 2 of them were more on the technical or programmatic side of the house. So, there was a fairly small number of us representing a big part of the solar system. And I think Laurie, I'm sure, knows only too well on their panel. They were representing, I think, the Moon, Venus, and Mercury, right? So it's not easy. And so you have to be able to not only speak up, not be intimidated by some of the other people on the panel who are probably, greats, like they're people you may have been in awe of for your entire career, and there you are, on an equal footing with them. It can be quite daunting, but you have to be willing to speak up you also need to be willing to put your own interests on the back burner and try and promote, what's good for the whole community, not your own pet project. And that's hard for us, in science, when a lot of us have been working on one thing for a long time. But it can be extremely rewarding. I think I've already talked about the sort of how useful it is to have a broader view. I think having a broad understanding of how NASA works as well and how missions work is also useful if you are called to be on the panel this time around. Making sure that you come into it with a good understanding of the previous decadal and the midterm. Although you are starting from scratch, which was, I have to say, quite a surprise to me, having worked for many years on a Europa study, to come in to that last decadal and find that the priorities of the previous decadal were just like, that's nice, but we're starting over again. But still having an understanding of just some of the history and some of the decisions that were made and what worked and what didn't. And actually the midterm review that we put out a couple of years ago is a great place to go and get that snapshot of, how was NASA doing and, what were the changes since the previous decadal. It's good to just have an understanding of that as you come in, because it will make your life a lot easier when you are on the panel. I think that's most of what I want to say. I also do want to just finish by mentioning just a phrase that was first mentioned to me by Michael Maloney, who was Colleen's predecessor, where he said that the Decadal Survey is a sword and a shield. And I just love this sort of idea that it is a sword that helps cut through all of that extraneous material. It helps cut through to what are the really clear, important science goals for our community. And it is a shield against getting sidetracked. It is a shield against sometimes interference from well-meaning other areas. It helps really guide our community. Is the Decadal Survey perfect? No. Of course, I'm sure we've all got things in it that we would rather weren't in there. But overall, it is the expression of what matters to our community and what we think NASA should be using taxpayers' dollars on over the next decade, and as Bethany and Bill have reiterated, beyond that. And I think it is a truly important document. And if you are involved, whether it is writing a white paper, whether it is being a scribe, whatever, even if it's just dialing in and listening to the sessions, everyone has a part to play, and it is a tremendously valuable endeavor. And so I encourage everybody to get involved in some way. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Can each of you perhaps say a little bit about what kind of advice you would give in a general sense to early career individuals listening to you today?
Well, maybe I'll just start by kind of reiterating two of the things that I said earlier, which is, think big, think time horizon. I think Bill illustrated that very nicely with graphics. So think about the long time horizon, and then back to the steps that are needed to get to the long-term goal. And then secondly, I do want to, reiterate, as Bill mentioned, none of the New Horizons folks ended up on the panel, and yet those ideas won the day in terms of the importance of the mission. So I think, do self-nominate for the panel, do, volunteer for, or consider putting your name in to apply for some of the internships for graduate students and postdocs at the National Academies, because then you have a very up-close position from the staff side to see what's happening. But don't underestimate the importance of just conversations with colleagues and taking the role to be a thought leader within the various AGs, within just collections of people, within the early career Planetary Sciences Facebook group, or whatever the forum is, to talk about your ideas and to have conversations about what matters. I mean, maybe there can be some Zoom happy hours devoted toward particular topics for the Decadal Survey while we're all isolated and can't do this over drinks at LPSC, right? But even if you can't be on the panel, you can still be a thought leader so that your ideas get infused into this process, and it makes everything better when we bring the best ideas forward.
Louisa, did you want to add?
hopefully you can hear me. I understand there's been some mic problems. I think just maybe building on white papers, the white papers are so useful, but adding information in there. If you think about your audience when you're writing those white papers, you're not just trying to promote a single idea, but you're trying to provide information that will be useful to that panel. And so, as we've mentioned, the panels read a lot of papers, they get a lot of information, and their job is to try and sort through it and focus in on what are the really important priorities. And so when you write your white papers, try and think about, how can you get your idea across in a very clear and succinct way. And sometimes things like tables or figures can be very useful to the panel. And I think that even in the midterm report, we ended up using some material that was submitted to us because it was so useful. It sort of captured an idea far better than we could ever do. And so we went and got permission and used some of those ideas in the report. So I would think about that too. And as I mentioned earlier, hopefully you could hear me okay, but, try and listen in if you can. If you're local to some of the meetings, some of them are open, portions of them are sometimes open. Just try and participate and learn, because even if you aren't involved in the panel this time, it will help you understand what's needed for the future.
Thanks. So that was, if anybody else wants to comment either on general advice or what to put in a white paper.
I was just going to add to what Louise just said about participation. I think I definitely would encourage everyone to get engaged in whatever level that you can, whether or not you're asked to be on a panel or whether you write white papers. But Louise mentioned listening in or participating in any of the meetings that are going to take place. It's a great way to hear what those conversations sound like and to hear what kinds of discussions are being had and what the community finds important. I fully expect that there will also be various town halls over the next year while the Decadal Survey is going on. So important to listen into the actual meetings, but also participate in those town halls to hear updates and learn more about the process and learn as much as you can. And then I think Bethany had some great ideas for just getting engaged in conversations. It's a wonderful way to be a part of the thinking and the thought process going forward.
So here's an interesting one for you all to tackle. Do you have any suggestions for dealing with your own biases during the review? We all have a favorite science or mission that we want to see happen. Any tips on how to keep an open mind?
Let me say something to that. One of the things that if you are well known as an advocate of such and such, you could volunteer to serve on a different kind of panel. I think that would be an excellent way to both broaden horizons and dispel any personal doubts about your own qualifications.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well. I think the National Academies has a pretty good system in place already to prevent biases from going unnoticed. And so they do a conflict of interest discussion at the beginning of every meeting where you go around the room and you basically, at least the beginning of every panel session, where you go around and you state any conflicts that you have. I've found, in my experience, people are usually pretty good about stating up front what their interests are, and sometimes removing themselves, either leaving the room or, for example, on the midterm, we had some smaller groups that got together, sort of side groups, and, you might recuse yourself from that group. So I think a lot of that is sort of taken out of the mix ahead of time. But part of being a good panelist is, realizing that it's not all about you. It's not all about your pet project. So yeah, we're not perfect human beings, but I think our peers understand that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Let's see. One thing to note, as Louise said, the Academies does have a very specific vetting process, and for financials, we look at each individual and assess that. There was a question about that. So we take a look at financial considerations. If your advice on a particular panel could, reward you financially, clearly that is going to be something that would be troubling. So that's the sort of thing. And one more was, can a NASA employee serve on a decadal survey panel? And absolutely they can. So let's see. MEPAG is currently soliciting impact. Do they have to submit under the auspices of MEPAG, or can they submit directly to the National Academies? You can submit directly to the National Academies. And here's one that may be mostly for Laurie. Will the COVID pandemic impact the schedule overall? For white papers, gave you the schedule, and again, we have a white paper nominees going up right now. When we get a chair, that's the point at which we start populating panels with the help of the chair or co-chairs. So that's how long you have to nominate. But the overall question of potential schedule impact, I'll send to Laurie.
Sure. So this is something that, of course, I think everybody's keeping a really close eye on. And I think Colleen even mentioned this at the beginning, that we recognize, I think the National Academy recognizes, and NASA also recognizes, that as more and more parts of our community across the country are shifting into a almost entirely virtual reality where we're all working through telepresence, we recognize that's a challenge, right? It's not just us, but it's also our spouses, or our kids are at home and trying to juggle what they're trying to do with their virtual schooling needs. And so we recognize that that's going to reduce our efficiency. And I think Colleen also mentioned that we have a lot of community members that are professors in universities that are also having to shift, pretty major shift from their in-person classes to developing online coursework and dealing with that reality as well. So all of these things we recognize are going to be potential impacts. And so I think as we go forward, it kind of depends, right, on how long this, and at this point, no one has the crystal ball to know what the other side of this is going to look like. So my kind of stance on this is that we're all keeping a really close eye, and we're trying to stay as close to the community pulse as we can to hear where people are having issues, help where we can. And if we need to shift schedule a little bit, we'll have to do that. But we're going to try to hold as best we can. But we do recognize that there are other realities, and we want to make sure we're sensitive to that going forward. So we'll work closely with the academies to keep a schedule that makes sense and gives us the best product at the other side. But again, to everybody's health and safety, number one. We want everyone to be healthy and safety, and that's our first priority.
Thank you, Laurie. So I think we're getting close to the end of the hour, so this one might be a good one. And that is, if I am not a part of a group that is already planning to write a white paper, what's the best way for me to get involved?
I might shoot that one over to Louise, since they've got the coordinating website on LPI.
Yeah. So at the LPI, we have a website set up where people can post paper titles and authors. The whole idea of the website is to try and get more authors and maybe some more interdisciplinary, more of an interdisciplinary focus to some of the papers, because the AGs have done a really good job of setting up their own website. But only those people who are involved in those AGs are tending to sign up to each other. So the point of the LPI site is to try and show that there are papers for anyone who wants to sign up. So just because you usually go to MEPAG doesn't mean you're not interested in ocean world. So I would encourage you to go there. I think there has been a bit of confusion where people aren't clear on whether they can just put their paper on one site or another. So I would also encourage you to, if you are interested in a certain area, maybe go check out the AG websites as well. But either way, that's a great way of getting involved. And also, I just encourage you, anyone can write a white paper, right? I know this has been said a couple of times, but I still keep hearing it, especially from postgrad students. It doesn't matter what your career level is. If you have a good idea, you have something that you feel the panel needs to hear about, you can lead a white paper. There is no hierarchy here. There are no rules that say you have to be an established professor or you have to have a certain number of years in the community. If you've got a good idea, we want to hear it. So anybody can lead a white paper. You can't find anything that you think covers an area that you want the panel to know about, then go ahead and write, lead a paper. You can write a white paper on your own. You don't need co-authors either. But, usually there is overlap. So that's why we're sort of trying to encourage people to not duplicate efforts. But if there's no duplication, I would say go for it. So Laurie, do you want to add to that, or captures it?
I think you've captured. I think just the one thing to mention is that the whole purpose of these websites is they're a tool for you, right? They're a tool for the community to help you better connect across the community with others. Like I said, I think before, other like-minded individuals that might share a passion for something. Is to help you find them, to have a better way or easier way to find those other folks that are out there that share your interests. So they're not required. You don't have to do something through a website. You can post your idea on multiple websites and find folks. They're really just tools for you to use to help you better connect. So make use of them.
Right, and I know we've said this a couple times, but these people have been on Decadal panels. Every white paper is read. There is no filter. Or, authors are reviewed. It has nothing to do with who wrote it. It has everything to do with the ideas in it.
And just a tiny thing, most white paper authors are looking for broad participation or at least endorsements. So you might keep an eye out and ear out for that.
Thanks to Louisa for that, for Laurie and Louisa having the foresight to set up a website where you can actually collaborate with each other. I'm going to ask Bethany one last question. Can you tell us a little bit about how being on a Decadal so early in your career shaped what you are today, if you will? That might be a little grandiose way to ask it, but.
Well, and to be clear, I actually have not been part of a Decadal Survey panel, but I was fortunate to have the role when I was an undergrad of being on the Space Studies Board side and assisting on the staff side of then disseminating the information that came out of the 2003 Decadal Survey. And for me, that was really, it was very fortuitous to be arriving at that point in time where, this large doc represented the scientific consensus was at the point where it needed to be disseminated. And so, as I mentioned earlier, my role was to create the pop version, that 20-page pretty picture, concise paragraphs, working with Brian Dewhurst and David Smith, of that, very long, will not be read probably in full by anyone, but few in some of the governmental, the other parts of the government and other sectors that are really important for seeing that the priorities of the Decadal Survey are carried out. And so being involved in that early in my career helped me to appreciate how this kind of process of really prioritizing and focusing on the best areas of science, how we then translate that into things that are actionable and that result in that science actually happening. So it was very kind of empowering to be there at that part of the process where you're attempting to communicate the results of an entire community to the broader collection of stakeholders. And yeah, it just highlighted the importance of the activity that I hope everyone on the line can be a part of.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I think this panelist really has an amazing array of experiences. Bethany, Laurie, Louisa, and Bill, it's been a pleasure listening to you and your experiences. I hope people are inspired. You can, again, self-nominate. There's a Gizmo survey app that comes up that you fill in. I think if you know something about the person you want to nominate, you won't have any trouble filling it out. So don't worry about that. And be sure to self-nominate if you want to participate. Be bold. And I think it will matter. I really loved what Bill said. It's actually just for the next decade. Flagship missions take more than one decade often enough to be launched and be successful. So the truth of the matter is it's more like a multi-decadal survey that we look at once a decade. So I just want to especially thank LPSC for hosting this. Thank all the participants. A special thanks to Laurie Glaze, Planetary Division Director at NASA headquarters. And please stay safe, stay separate for now, and stay healthy. Thank you.